Awesome. So, first off, thank you all for coming. We're super excited to be hosting this panel. Shout out to the People's Forum for giving us space. My name is Tori. I use they, them pronouns. And first off, War Resisters League likes to work really consciously on decolonizing our activism. So we would just want to acknowledge that this land that we're sitting on is known as Lenapolking. It's the land of the Lenape, and we always like to start out by doing this. The other thing that we like to do is also acknowledge the organizing that took place before whatever we're doing, and kind of acknowledging that we're carrying on a legacy that's not new. And so the two groups that really helped to inspire this particular teach-in are the Lesbians and Gays Against Intervention in the early 90s, and then also the Queer Trans War Ban more recently. For those of you who don't know, War Resisters League is a 95-year-old anti-militarist organization. What we mean by anti-militarist is we see not just kind of the traditional kind of anti-war stance, but also standing against all forms of state violence, both inside the United States and out of it, and see the ways that those things are often interlinked. We're here to remove the causes of war and violence, and really also believe fundamentally in organizing from an internationalist perspective as a principle. And so a few quick housekeeping announcements. Gender-neutral bathrooms are there and back there. For those of you who are bringing bitty ones, we have childcare. It's downstairs. You can check in at the front desk for all of that. And then for questions and answers, a little bit after the panel will be, if you can just kind of start off by saying your name and your personal gender pronouns, and your org if you're repping an org or something like that in this space. Sound good with everybody? Yes. Awesome. So one of the big things, and the reason why we're calling this a teach-in and not a panel, is because we believe in bringing people together in order to organize, not just kind of sit and have knowledge kind of dropped on y'all and then everybody goes about their lives. So the overview for this is we're going to kind of have the first half of this kind of with kind of a more traditional panel where each of the panelists will be kind of sharing a little bit more about ourselves, and we'll have some Q&A. But then the second half will actually be kind of small group breakouts with y'all to really carry this conversation that we started here forward and think about ways in organizing that we can move this conversation and ways of standing against war and militarism as a queer and trans community, right, forward, and the steps that we're going to need to take in that. Yeah, and so we'll try and wrap that up, and then have a brief little report back, and then we'll all get out of here. So I guess I'll start off by having the panelists introduce themselves really quickly. So.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Mirna. I go by she or they, and hashtag still single. Just kidding.
I am Sarah Jane Marr. I use she, her pronouns.
Hi, I'm Azrael Dean Martinez. They, them pronouns are representing CGay.
Awesome. So really where the idea for this panel came from is a few of us kind of sitting down and really thinking about what the conversation overall, especially in the kind of mainstream space, has been around the trans ban, has been completely, especially on the left, completely dominated by a kind of liberal democratic discourse around, kind of very pro-war and very kind of traditionalist approach to the military. And first off, kind of that conversation completely erasing trans folks who are under our bombs or are fleeing invasion, war, and militarism globally, right? And seeing the ways that their lives are completely erased in this conversation, and really wanting to offer a space to talk about that and talk about centering those folks as a part of our any conversation that's happening around the trans ban, and more globally, U.S. militarism. And then also kind of as part of this conversation, trans veterans are kind of painted as this homogenous group that are all kind of have the same relationship to their service and don't and are just kind of completely in the kind of groupthink thing. And when, organizing with veterans groups and stuff, we know that there's a ton of different perspectives, right, from veterans on how their service affected them, what the military means, and ways to move forward. So for War Resisters League, and for me personally, this felt really important to have this convo, to start this conversation, and really think about, like, what does it mean to cede space to these folks on the mainstream discourse about, like, let's establish either like a Democratic or a Republican stance in this, and not really talking about it that much on the left, with a few really important exceptions, but wanting to have that broader conversation. And so I think with that, I'm going to turn it over to our panelists. And yeah, thank you.
Hi, y'all. So I don't know where to start in regards to the discussion, because it's like, what is this queer, trans, Filipino American doing standing up here talking about war? And like, why does it mean so much to me, even though, like, not war, but like the fact that we have to fight against it. And then I think it just goes back to like where I really started, is when in 2015, I met some really militant queer Filipinos out on the streets, and they were out there campaigning against justice for Jennifer Laude. And Jennifer Laude was a trans woman in the Philippines, where she was killed by U.S. Joseph Scott Pemberton in October 2014. And from that point on, it was him using the trans panic defense and the United States continuously trying to protect him because he is a U.S. Marine on foreign soil, quote unquote. And the Filipino people were trying to assert their Philippine sovereignty and essentially fight, for true justice for this woman. She is the breadwinner, where the only job that she was able to find in the Philippines is sex work, and that she was able to just provide for her family. And this U.S. Marine just killed, a family's livelihood, a person that'd be able to just have food on the table, a roof over their head. And that's what got me, is because we all wanted to just live and be happy. And so I've been able to organize with Buy-in USA and really understand the true roots of what's the issues, why we are continuously being oppressed, may it be because we're queer, because we're trans, or because the color of our skin. But at the end of the day, we're still fighting for the same system. And I was able to really learn and understand that. And then from that point on, I was able to truly see that there is a need for queer, trans Filipinos to be able to stand up and go from there. And that's when we were able to start CGay. And coming from that point, it's where this past year has been really highly intense. If folks know, in the news, like in the newspaper, you see the Philippine president, Rodrigo Duterte, continuously killing the people of the poor. And how is he doing that? He is doing that because it's from our US tax dollars. And this is something that we have to continuously think about, like the US tax dollars that should be going to the people here is going overseas. 50% of the US budget is going to foreign aid. And part of that is going to the Philippines. $193 million is going to foreign aid. Part of that money is going towards the killing the Filipino, the poor people in the Philippines, who are supposedly quote unquote drug pushers or drug lords. But it's really that fact. So this past March, there's a group that I was aware of, is International League of People's Struggle, where they were continuously propping this campaign called the Resist US-Led War, where they were trying to really be out there in movement. There's a huge group of people, Filipinos, who are anti-war, and they're out there and activists, and they went to DC to really go against NATO, what was going on with like everything, all the foreign aid. And then from that point on as well, I was able to meet Tori, and we were able to meet with some folks with the International Coalition for Human Rights in the Philippines, and we were able to lobby, have some lobbying days in DCs as well, and like talk to our senators and state that the money that we are funding to go to the Philippines is really killing the poor people in the Philippines. As of right now, it's over 30,000 people that he had killed. 30,000 people that is essentially overfills the size of Madison Square Garden. That's like over capacity of that. Just imagine all that, and that's the people that's being funded from our tax dollars. And continuation of like all the money that's continuing is killing human rights defenders that are continuously standing up for it. You know, there's a quote that like whenever I see that more and more Filipino activists or activists in the Philippines are being killed and harassed, is that they keep thinking that they're going to bury us, but they don't realize that that we are seeds and we will continuously fight. And that's what was beautiful about this, is that, like what Tori said earlier, that our movement is not something that is new. It is something that we're continuously going to do. So with that being said, I just wanted to highlight also a recent human rights defender who happened to also identify as gay, was killed and shot a couple of days ago. And like in response to that, is like over 5,000 activists in the Philippines went and marched down the streets and was demanding that there be justice for all these human rights defenders from today and for moving back in the past, since Duterte has been president. And just wanted to highlight that and give him like a moment of space, because you know, these are people that know and understand we are being oppressed and that we are continuously having to fight, may it be here or abroad. Sorry. And then in regards to that as well, is that we're continuously fighting in regards to that. So with CGAY, I was able to do the lobbying, really understand that we're trying to get the 195 million out as well. And like something that was really interesting, and the reason why I continuously like want to fight, is the fact that people don't see us as like actual people. They see us as like commodities or things that we don't, I guess, just expendable. Like we're collateral damage. And when I say that is because we are one of the population that's oppressed that are continuously being targeted to be recruited for something, because there is no stable jobs or anything to that extent. And that we have to continuously fight against this U.S. war, the U.S. war machine, essentially, that is continuously funding overseas wars. And like as we speak right now, there's a delegation going to Hong Kong of 500 delegates, where they're going to be talking about building the anti-war alliance and really being an international campaign against Boeing. When I happened to go one of those queer job hunts, like open house, Boeing was like one of the top recruiters, and they were recruiting them in order to do that. And some of the things that they were doing is that they have built a drone. In the Philippines, it was called Operation Scan Eagle, where it maps out the terrain and like really focuses on that. And this is something that one of the things that Boeing is trying to build, and this is what overseas that we're consistently trying to build against and try to fight against that, because we do not want that. We don't want our queer trans folks to be part of this machine that is continuously being funded, but it's not like something that they actually really care about us. So the reason, yeah, and with that being said, like for regards to next steps for CGAY, we're gonna be like marching at the Queer Liberation March with Reclaim Pride And we also are going to be continuously fighting and like addressing and showing that the U.S. tax dollars that are continuously being paid to the Philippines is that we need to cut that. So on July 22nd, we are going to be having an action in front of the Philippine consulate for People's Sono. So I would like to invite y'all to join us and link arms in regards to it and really show solidarity, because what's really important is that the international solidarity perspective that by us cutting like one arm of the U.S. imperialist arm, we are able to like key on down to that monster. So it would be really good that if we all could see y'all too.
Before I start, I'm going to fix this microphone because it looks like it's about to pop out, and that'd be bad news. Can everyone hear me? Okay. So I am Sarah Jane Marr. I am a transgender veteran against war. I served a total of 16 years in the U.S. military. I started out in the Marine Corps in 1992. Got out and I was in the Army National Guard briefly, and then I was in the Air National Guard for about 10 years. While I was in the Air National Guard, I deployed to Germany, Afghanistan, and Qatar. I performed a variety of duties as part of my military service. Throughout the entire period of my military service, kind of just unaware of the impact that my service had on the world. It just, it saddens me to think that, in the early parts of my military career, I helped recruit people through, being a musician in the Marine Corps, where I, performed at recruiting events, and kind of like those events were used to kind of draw people in and expose them to military pomp and circumstance, and then in the Air National Guard, a little bit more directly through my participation in deployments, where in my mind I'm fixing planes that are just being used to transport vital supplies, but in reality being used to transport ammunition and troops, and yeah. So I guess I'm really kind of here to give the trans veterans perspective on this, and specifically trans veterans perspective of a trans veteran who is against war. The reasons I went into the military are probably very similar to a lot of other folks. I was getting out of high school. I was not a good student. Nobody in my family had ever gone to college, so that seemed like the obvious route to college opportunity was to join the military and have them pay for my education, which doesn't really happen. I mean, it's, they help. But another underlying issue was that I knew deep down inside, as I was finishing high school, that I was different. I didn't have the words for it at the time because this was back in the early 90s. So there were no really famous trans people out there. I mean, there were, but like nobody that was in the news on a regular basis. And if I was seeing trans people in the news, it was in like tabloid stories or on Jerry Springer. So I had no clue who I was, what I was, where my life was heading. So it seemed like an obvious choice to join the military. And I was able to do something I loved, which was music, which 4 years as a military musician took away my love of music, unfortunately. But another big part for me was to assert my masculinity. I thought maybe joining the military could kind of like work it out of me and make it so I didn't feel this way anymore, make it so I didn't feel like I was in the wrong body or presenting the wrong way. Spoiler alert, it does not work. But it seemed like an option. I know many other people who went into the military and were closeted. I was in at the time of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. So, you know, even other folks from the LGBT community were excluded from service or excluded from being themselves as they served. I don't speak in public very often, so I apologize if I'm really broken and inconsistent. The impact of my service on me was the 4 years that I spent in the Marines was a hyper-masculine, macho, homophobic, racist, transphobic, any ism or phobia you can think of was shown on a regular basis. And it was very hard for me. There were other people in my unit who I knew were queer, but were also like very solidly closeted in order to continue to have a career in the military. I know I don't speak for all trans veterans. I don't think anybody really could possibly speak for all trans veterans. I am friends with folks who are fighting on a daily basis for trans military service. I respect their need to do that. I feel like trans service it's an important touchstone issue in that if the military is allowed to exclude trans folks from serving, then why can't other organizations do the same? I feel it at that level. I know, like nobody should. When asked, I will say, I do not feel that transgender people should be able to serve in the military. I don't feel that anybody should be able to serve in the military. So the fact that it's kind of a battleground to get the rights that other people have, that cis people have, to join the military, is important. But also, like, I really wish it was like the battleground was someplace else. Like, I really wish McDonald's was excluding trans people from working for them, so we would have, the ability to reaffirm the worth of the individual and to basically fight for trans rights and trans equality. That's about all I have. Yeah. That's it.
Thank you so much for sharing. I'm not gonna lie, every time someone says that they served in the army, just suddenly I feel it physically. I feel like my heart beats fast, and it's important that I recognize that. But thank you for sharing all of that. So I kept thinking, what am I gonna say? Because for me, it's really simple, no military, right? Like, it's really simple. Why am I here talking about this again, over and over again? And I recognize that, yes, it's simple. However, there are nuances to it and some realities that I maybe wanted to attempt to get to. And I call them buckets because I feel like they're messy buckets, they're everywhere. And so it's simple. For me, no military. No military at all. And maybe I failed to mention, my personal story is that I'm a direct war survivor in Lebanon, even before 2006, because liberal are like, oh yeah, 2006. I was like, no. Israel has been bombing us for way before then. And also, I'm a direct war survivor of the civil war in the Ivory Coast. And as a kid growing up in those two countries, I started realizing and noticing the similarities of the weaponry used, the clothing that they use. And I would be in my garden and under the fig tree, and I'll find a leftover shell or bomb or etc. And it had these codes and these numbers, and it's interesting because those were very similar to the ones I also came across in Ivory Coast. And I was really young, so I was growing up and noticing those similarities between those things. Then I came to the US 10 years ago, and actually not a long time ago, I was running in Prospect Park. It was Memorial Day, and I was coming down, actually I was going up a hill and I was really struggling. And then as I finished that hill, I was like, yes, I just finished that hill. I didn't stop running. And there were all these tanks and helicopters and military planes, they landed them into Prospect Park, and they had all these kids going around and like, you know, watching and looking at those like amazing tools. And for me, it was very triggering. I really struggled to continue running because it was exactly the same things. You know, it just didn't say USA, it said IDF on the tank where, and those like, I know the names in Arabic, and it was interesting for me that, holy fuck, it's the same thing. It's the same oppressive, you know, tools that are used against us wherever. So that's where I come to anti-militarization, and I have very strong feelings to people who come to anti-militarization from a theological perspective or an academic perspective. I get very sensitive, but I come from it because of my experience in surviving and also holding it. I owe it to people who have died. I owe it to my family members who have died. I owe it to those people who have died. And more specifically, in this narrative of trans inclusion in the military, I owe it to trans people who are dying, being killed by those same institutions, to actually say no militarization. And you know, I say this often and often because some backlash we've gotten is that, you know, I don't identify as trans. I'm a gender non-conforming person, and I recognize that I'm not, you know, from the trans experience. However, I feel as a queer community umbrella in general, we need to hold each other even more accountable. We need to have those difficult conversations even more than normal cis people. For me, the bar is higher within my community, specifically Muslim and Arab community and gender non-conforming folks. So now we get to the messy buckets, like I like to call them. And a few things pop to mind. Poverty draft, someone mentioned it earlier, which means, you know, we all know this, right? Like people join the military for many reasons, like you've shared, but also the main focus, I mean, the main arm of the military is targeting poor people in rural America or in other countries. And you can notice this by their recruitment centers and where they go. Also immigration, that's a bucket for me, because if you are not born in America and if you are assigned male at birth, you have to check a box that says you are automatically drafted into the military, which is very interesting, and no one notices this. And in the oath, actually, the last 5 questions of your immigration benefit application, whether it be asylum, green card, citizenship, I think the last 3 questions are you swear that you will serve a military combatant role in the army, and then you swear that you will serve a non-military combatant in the army. Thank you. And so for me, that was interesting. And actually, if you check no for any of those boxes, you will be denied immigration benefits. And then you have to go through all those hoops. There are very rare exceptions that people use for religious reasons. And I invoked mine for being war survivor. And they were like, well, that's not enough. You need to say that you will serve in the army in a combatant. And I said, I get stressed around, you know, guns and etc. And they had to call the supervisor. Anyways, long story short, now I'm getting in trouble for that. But it's interesting that army, you know, arm is super entrenched. The poison is leaking and reeking in every area that we work on as progressives. And another thing that I would like to touch on is the criminalization side of things, right? The army has its own rules on how it will hold someone accountable, meaning incarcerate people. Recently, post 9/11, maybe from before, but now it's exponentially higher, because of the war on terror, the army has been capturing people abroad and bringing them here to Manhattan, taking them to Guantanamo Bay. And the way they're captured is because they assumed in their racist white colonizer lens that this person is a threat back home, not here. Military is people, they do this work, so the FBI does the work here, like where they like target Muslims and people who are like potential quote-unquote terrorists, but the military is the arm that does this abroad. And then when they capture you and bring you over to either Guantanamo Bay or here, you don't have any due process rights. You do not have the right to counsel. You can be held indefinitely. And even the rules of evidence, which means what can be held, like what can be shown against you in court if you get to court, are even like more strict. Basically, you can never prove that you are innocent. And so until this day, we have people in Manhattan detention centers who have been rotting and dying slowly for years now because the military captured them and they have no due process rights. So that's interesting, and that's, so those complicated buckets for me brings me to the first thing I said. It's simple. Why are we even having this conversation? No army. Like, we don't want anyone in the militarization. And as someone who's a survivor of war, I actually feel more strongly for a gay person and a queer person and a trans person launching that bomb, playing the music to the people who are launching the bomb at me, or designing a tank or some kind of science, technology aspect that is used against me. A bomb is a bomb. And whether you are trans on the other end of it, I don't care, honestly. You're still killing me and my people. So that's why I felt very strongly against organization like, for example, Lambda Legal. I'm in law school, so I feel like no one is going to hire me after this talk. That's fine. So they came to my school and said, how am I doing on time? 5 minutes, great, okay. Okay, so being inclusive in such an institution, despite all those complexities, it's a dangerous door to enter because we're erasing the importance of it. And it's complicated. Again, I'm going to go back and forth between simple and complicated. Is that it's simple, I don't want the military. It's complicated, there are all these buckets. However, there's one thing that we can focus on, that transphobia is real. Islamophobia is real. Anti-blackness is real. And people are dying every day because of that. So if we want to focus on our efforts and our money and our organizational budgets and our love and passion and labor of love into inclusion of trans in the military, we're doing it the wrong way. We are on the wrong side of history. But if we want to do work to support trans folks, we want to do work to stop Islamophobia and do a better job at being better with, in solidarity with black folks, is that we can do those things outside of the military. And we should be doing those things outside of the military because there are a lot of people who are dying every day who share those identities. And I think the last thing I will mention is that, the money side, I'm always shocked. Some people are like, why are you even talking against the US military? One, you're an asylum seeker here, so how dare you? And I was like, okay, interesting. Second is, you've been bombed by IDF, not the US military. And I was like, wow, you need some education. And three, and then I thought about the main thing, which is poverty and tax money. And it blows my mind. Like, I even as a non-citizen, I pay taxes, all of us pay taxes. And 1.8 million, I checked before talking, $1.8 trillion has been spent in 2018, just in the US military. And so that equates to about, I think, $240 a person all over the world. And think about it, like in some countries, in some areas, even here actually, some people don't even have $5 to eat a day. And then I'm thinking about the connection to Israel. From our taxes, we give $8.4 million every day, not to science research in Israel, not to all this nonsense in Israel, just for military aid in Israel. That's just for killing children and women and displacing people, using the same tanks, the same technology, the same companies that provide, there's someone manufacturing those things. There are engineers in plain clothes going to fancy schools thinking like, I'm going to design the most lethal tank somewhere. I don't know who these people are, and I hope I'll die single and I don't have to date any of them. No, but really, and then we don't see those links, and why are we not talking about the important thing instead of focusing that? And I really hope that we can push that narrative. I felt guilty at first, feeling like I'm not a trans person, I'm a queer person, immigrant, saying I don't want trans person launching a bomb at me and my family. But then actually I said, no, I want to be on the right side of history. I do want to do trans work, but outside of that oppressive institution. So anyways, with that, I look forward to chatting in breakout sessions, and so we can, dig deeper into that conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, can we just get a hand for all of our panelists? Great. If somebody actually wants to do me a favor, that mic stand right there, if someone would be up for just bringing it up here. And yeah, so I think at this point we'll spend a little bit of time just doing kind of general questions for the whole panel to respond to. And we'll do that for about like 15 minutes. So if anybody has a question, you can just come up and line up at the mic and ask it. Yeah, do you want to come up?
Come.
Thank you for speaking to us.
It's okay. Yeah.
Once again, I feel like a lot of us probably agree with you guys that militarization, especially for the inclusion of trans identities, is sort of like a co-optation of the inclusion narrative, and I 100% agree with you. But thinking about where the sort of just join the army propaganda is propagated by the state, what people are affected by it, and how inclusion into militarization first included the inclusion of women, then it included the inclusion of queer people in general, and now the discussion is whether trans people can be in it and not. I want to think that if, let's say now we are trying to hope to create a world or organize for a world in which militarization can be rejected, where do we sort of adjust it for the understanding of the psychologies of the subjects of the state in how they're affected? So for places where this propaganda of statehood and army is more so, a boy will grow up always feeling entitled to statehood and thus then involvement into the military. And for equality to the female subject, born female subject in the state, inclusion into the army would be sort of giving that entitlement, which then is what leads me to believe is the impulse of queer people wanting this sort of inclusion into the statehood, because to serve for the state will also mean that you will get benefits of the state in the ideal sort of setup. And so sort of my question is, how do we interact with that psychological process that starts happening to children way before exclusion of certain identities from certain institutes happen? And I would agree with you. So I'm from Pakistan, and also I've had an experience with a lot of different types of military forces and different types of political involvement with them. And I see a lot of commonalities within them. And I'm sorry, I come from an academic point of view into my understanding of the army.
I'm in law school now, so I lost my.
But I feel like the discussions of the army sometimes, I don't know, I feel like, what is your guys' opinion on the very concept of masculinity and then collaborative masculinity that requires this sort of investment, and that being represented in the army? Because if the army is protecting the state from borders, sovereignty that must not be impenetrated, what does that have to do with, once again, our psychologies? How much does the boy kid relate to the army and the state?
And I think we'll take one more, and then we'll answer both of them.
Hi. I have maybe a very broad question, but I'm wondering, I feel like in a lot of U.S. anti-war organizing, there's such a focus on military imperialism and the U.S. war machine that sometimes the aspect of economic imperialism gets lost, and the fact that that war machine is really serving U.S. corporate interests and the interests of capital. And then when that gets ignored, some really disturbing configurations come up, like during the Iraq War, when there was people like Women Without War positioning sanctions as an alternative to war, right? So I'm wondering in these discussions, or maybe in your activism, how you see ways to not lose that connection, and maybe with other queer economic justice organizing to kind of bridge that gap. Thank you so much.
So we'll do this round, and then folks can come up for a second round.
Would you like to?
Sure.
I saw you taking notes. So.
Yeah. Well, so on the first question, how do we, the question as I understand it is, starting to get feedback, sorry. How do we prevent the conditions that make people feel like the military is the way to go in their life? And so you hit on some really important subjects around that. The gradual inclusion of different, I hate to use the word classes of people, but of different oppressed classes of people that have been gradually included in the military. And it does kind of eventually become like the hallmark of like, well, you are a fully participating member of this democracy if you can serve in the military, right? Like you're all in. And a lot of that speaks to like a sense of patriotism, like a lot of misguided patriotism, I believe. A kind of like not the patriotism where you care what the rest of the world thinks about your country, but more along the lines of the jingoistic patriotism, where yay America, American exceptionalism. And a big thing that feeds into that is the like you're talking about a young boy being raised in the U.S. and seeing the military as like kind of like a goal. And there's definitely lots of young boys find themselves kind of idolizing the military because they're always like every time they turn around, hero is being rammed down their throat. And also like masculinity. Like if you want to be, if you're going to be a man's man, join the military. That's what you do. That's how you do it. So I think there's a lot of different. How to actually fight against that, I don't know. I think to point out the fact that the patriotism that is being exhibited is a false jingoistic patriotism, and to help people realize that there are other opportunities out there that they can participate in, other programs that can help them attend school or learn a trade or whatever they want to do. So I think a big part of it comes down to not only diminishing the value of military service. How to do that is a big question, but also to make it so that they're not the only game in town for those type of opportunities. Hopefully I didn't talk in too many circles, but yes, that's how I feel about it.
For me, I'm gonna, I guess, kind of share some kind of taboo, come out of the closet. So the little boy that grew up here in the U.S., I actually wanted to join the Marines. And it's because what we're taught in school, the U.S., they saved the little brown boy, the Philippines, from whatever it may be. But actually it's just imperialism and colonialism. And the fact that we're this big superhero, that's, hello? It's going. Okay, that we're this big superhero, the little boy inside of me that said I want to be this, and I wanted to sign up because, there's a part of me that wanted to show my masculinity because I wasn't assigned that. And I think what really starts from that is just for me to come from that and to be where I'm at today. It's just a matter of actually having an education that would really talk about the people's history and really talk about what it means for real true democracy and what it really means to provide for the people. If the government is supposed to be serving the people in order to get the homes and whatnot, the tax dollars should be going to that and shouldn't be going to military. So it's just a fact of relearning or unlearning what is taught to us in our public school systems and providing the space, the People's Forum, or having these teach-ins and really talking about why are we continuously oppressed by how we identify, and really understand and unpack just the actual machinery, and really understand that the U.S. is not, or just the schools is not really for us to continuously be part of the cogs or be part of the system to continue and keep continuing like putting more money into the 1%, the ruling class.
Sure, quickly. So I'm a mother of twins, and they're 2 years and a half. They go to daycare in La Guardia, and it's interesting because, I mean, it's interesting because it's not shocking. It's everywhere. This culture that you spoke about is everywhere. Even reflecting back home is like, you know, the army is brought to schools to be celebrated, and for someone like me, do I take my army or do I take the Israeli Defense Forces? So you're like kind of put in a difficult position, because even though they're using the same technology and tactics and etc., you'd be like, okay, I'll stand behind my army instead of, you know, someone who is defending me on the defending side rather than attacking me. And that's the same perspective people use here. It's like, I'm joining the army to defend myself from the other enemy. Anyways, long story short is I'm just realizing that I'm really an angry Arab all the time. Is that at one time I was dropping them off to school, to daycare, and I was kissing them to say bye, or maybe they were having a meltdown, one of these things. And I looked to the side, and like there were bags to play with. You know, I was like happy that, oh, okay, there are like some purses, which I never carry, but like, okay, great, they can be exposed to it. And then at the side, there's like a police car, and there's like military something, US Army, like it had this US Army sticker. I don't remember what it was. It was a car or something. But I remember flipping out. Like I didn't say anything, I internalized it, because immediately I was like, holy shit, I'm this immigrant mother, queer mother, who's dropping off these kids to daycare, and we're always like, they're like, Mommy, did you know this? Mommy, did you know this? And I was like, so I like stressed about not being able to tell them that I don't want my kids playing with these things as a normal toy like thing. And how does it start is I expect parents who don't share my experience to be better allies, because I think I'm crazy, like flipping out about that. And then, okay, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna go to class. But then it's really on my ally parent to say, why is this in the classroom? So I don't know if that, you know, gets to it, but this is how I think about it.
Is there any other questions?
We actually, we didn't really talk about the
Oh, yeah,
second question. I don't have a lot to offer on it. So with the question about economic imperialism, the agencies that are, you know, imposing these sanctions on other countries, they don't have a trans ban. Like, you know, so they, like anybody can go in and do that work. And that's like as far as relevancy to today, like they're, you know, anybody is eligible, well, anybody that's qualified is eligible to go and do that work. So again, I think, you know, making that work less appealing, although I think somebody will do it no matter what. But just to, yeah, I'm sorry. I don't have much else to say on that. I feel that with relevancy to trans service, the trans ban, you know, there's no exclusions on who can do that type of work. Yeah, so that's all I have.
I guess like within the spaces that I work with in regards to like the economic imperialism, it's just like I just go back to like this, like I've been to the Philippines and I was able to integrate with some indigenous folks in Mindanao. And so Mindanao is like the southern part of the Philippines, and they have so many resources there. And I just think about the stories that they hear is that, one, the military aid that's being sent there is like they're pushing the indigenous people out of their land. And that is so that the mining companies, the foreign mining companies, are just connecting it to the mine, that they are pushing them out so that they could get the resources there. And like those resources make this phone that I'm like probably using, or this microphone that we're talking through, or even just some of the like things that we drink every day, in that aspect. Just kind of connecting that, like it comes back to, it all goes back to, again, wanting to continuously keeping the corporations rich. They're the ones that really advocate for that, and it's like tied to like the lobbying. It's just like all these interconnected. It's like this really ugly web. So just like continually having that conversation, intertangling it with it.
That's okay.
Hi, Hi. Thank you all for being here and for speaking. My name is Bax. I use they, them pronouns. I'm with Reclaim Pride in the Queer Liberation March. I recently had a conversation with someone who is a queer veteran who was sort of expressing hesitancy against using too much anti-military rhetoric in like promotions or signage or whatever, out of fear that that could be sort of like alienating or keeping queer and trans veterans out of work that you're doing. And so I wonder if y'all have insights in terms of language or practices and ways that you can sort of like articulate these positions without excluding people from joining our movements and our work, particularly as several of you have articulated, a lot of these people who are veterans are poor folks or people of color or who are otherwise marginalized, who are obviously some of the people who we like most desperately need in our work and who are in most in need of like these resources. So yeah.
Hi, my name is Moiz. I'm from Pakistan and I graduated from college recently. I have a sort of a similarly related question about pride and the military and how to think through that. And I'll just leave it at that. So thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So thank you so much for bringing that question. I feel for me personally, I'm never gonna be vanilla on my language with that because it's very important and clear. However, I want to say, and it's important to be intentional about who's in the room, which is a grounding rule that we need to do everywhere. And like, I mean, this panel is quite also like good, like in a way that I've also done work with veterans all the time. And I feel like making people uncomfortable is not a bad thing. And I feel like it's actually a good thing. If you are uncomfortable, that means we are getting somewhere. But I don't think that I should, personally speaking, that I should say, because what would I say if I'm not saying completely anti-military? You know, what is the alternative for me as someone who's surviving wars or survived wars? And so I just want to also be clear that with that, it's important to ask, who are we leaving out from what we want to achieve, which is something we need to be asking all the time. But I don't think we should back up from our right side of history narrative, because that's, for me, in my eyes, this is the right side of history. So, oh, the pride question. I don't know honestly how to answer this, but I always not blame, but I'm like, why aren't people angry about this? Because I have very strong feelings around liberals who normalize these things, because like I'm really tired and I feel like, why are liberals justifying the presence of the cops and army in the military? Because I feel like it's my allies' duty to say like, why are they here? But no one is having that conversation.
With regard to language, I know trans and queer veterans from really across the political spectrum, and I think the thing to avoid, in my view, is language derogatory to the people who are actually serving, who may be the victims of specific consequences that brought them to have to do that.
Yeah.
You know, that might be the only opportunity that was available to them. They're not necessarily making the decisions. They are not necessarily, you know, yes, they could, you know, become conscientious objectors and choose not to work for the military anymore. It's a complicated process. But I feel like, so like, I guess anti-military but not anti-troop, if that makes sense. but it's super complicated because they are the people out there doing the work. And I think, if you're somebody who's out on the front lines, especially, the impact of what's happening. Somebody who's back, like, fixing a plane doesn't really have they don't see the people that they're fighting. But somebody who's out there fighting and sees the people that they're fighting, it's just super complicated. But I think that line of being anti-troop is going to definitely cause some vets to have some feelings about that.
Sorry, can you clarify anti-troop?
So language that's targeted against the actual people who are in the military, not against the military-industrial complex, even though, like, when you weave down into the bottom of it, they are part of the military-industrial complex, but they're a cog in the machine. So the language of calling someone a baby killer comes to mind. That's strong, harsh language. It's true language, but it's strong, harsh language that may cause some people to feel like they're not welcome in that space. And with regard to the military at Pride, I haven't. Is that a thing around here? I don't live around here. I live in Baltimore, and so we don't really have. I've yet to see the military participating in Pride in any way.
They do.
Up around here, like recruiting efforts, or.
So, for example, I was just in D.C.
Mhm.
And the military was there with their flags and leading them.
DC is just the DC Pride Parade is just like the parade of the military-industrial complex. Like, Lockheed has like 100 people marching for them.
Yeah.
Boeing has 100 people. Yeah, they have a float and they're throwing rainbow beads, and it's like, where's the money, coming from to do this? So yeah, so I guess if in larger cities the military is participating in Pride events, I don't see where they don't belong there. I mean, that's the bottom line, is they don't belong there. How to get them out of that space is a different story, I guess. Grassroots organizing and like going to the organizations that are running Pride, which are also themselves usually very commercial organizations, and getting them to specifically exclude the military and hopefully police as well from Pride celebrations.
In regards to languaging, in regards to that, I know that's always a difficult situation. That's also something that I'm having hard difficulty of, like, trying to find it. I think it's just a matter of having those one-on-one conversations or group conversations to really understand and, like, awaken, I guess, their revolutionary consciousness that, they are part of the cogs and that we need to come together to fight. So, like, I think if you're able to, again, I would definitely support the anti-military, not anti-troop. Concentrate on that. Concentrate on the actual system. And then if people are questioning, it's like, okay, let's have a conversation, after this march or something like that. Just have that kind of discussion. And then while we're, at Pride, like, we see cops, we see corporations continuously. It's like rainbow capitalism. It's just a matter of, like, just don't try to be part of it, or try to, like, really go back to grassroots organizing, where we have to come together and, like, really link arms, and, like, saying that, like, we're tired of this, of, like, the way the system's going. We're, like, decaying. There's no water in Flint now. There's no water, like, clean water coming up in Newark, New Jersey. Why is money being sent to the Philippines? Why is it being, to fund IDF when it could be helping our people here, that we could have affordable health care or whatever? I think that's just a matter of going back to grassroots organizing and, like, telling people not to be part of situations where we're continuously adding more cogs to the system.
I'll just add a brief thing. So a big part of where I started my activism was doing counter-recruitment work. And I think that one of the things that work really taught me was that that people's decisions to try and join the military are always incredibly complicated, and understanding where they're coming from as a part of that is actually really crucial to engaging with that conversation and thinking about what are the movements and worlds we're trying to build. Like for me, right, coming from an abolitionist like perspective, like thinking about ways that we are trying to create alternative systems so that we're not just relying on a state that like murders Black and brown people in order to sustain its own survival. You know, and so yeah, thinking about like what are the ways that we're building up economic security for queer and trans femmes so they don't feel like they need to like take these jobs because that's the only thing that's available. Like especially in a lot of these like organizing spaces where it's like, yeah, you have to have a college degree in order to like apply for this thing. You have to have these things where it's like a lot of these folks joining the military, it's like they join it because they can't go to college, or they do that, you know, building up scholarships for queer and trans folks. And then also, you know, the harder parts for me are really like thinking about like the places where like, you know, for trans men who want to join the military because it is a way to have your masculinity affirmed, right? Like what are the ways that we're trying to like create places where your masculinity can be seen, that it's not based on like a destructive impulse or thing. And that's an incredibly complicated, hard project involving like tearing down patriarchy and militarism and all these things. And we need to do all of it, right? But it's, you know, I think getting down to the root of that. And then also like, I think a lot of folks, especially queer and trans folks that are coming from situations where they're like, their home families or their communities are really broken and just really wanting like a structure around them. I think that was one of the most common things that I heard when I was doing counter recruitment work, was that folks wanted structure. They wanted a system, a thing that surrounded them that felt really solid. And oftentimes our organizing is really built around unstructured things or creating things that are kind of like looser. But I think thinking about ways that we can help create structure and lives for people that can draw them in, I think is also super, super important. So I think we have time for maybe like one or two more, and then we'll like move into a little bit of a small group discussion. So. Cool. Well, thank you so much for bringing all the questions now. For folks that need to run, totally understand, but I think my hope about bringing this together was also thinking about some next steps that War Resisters League could take, and also that like information that we could share with your organizations, and ways that we can think about how are we continuing this conversation beyond just People's Forum. And so what I'm hoping to do is maybe like, you know, for like the 5 or 6 people around you, introduce yourself to some strangers, and just I think the things that are really kind of centered in my mind that might be useful kind of discussion starters for y'all would be like, first off, like right now, according to several studies, the U.S. military is the largest trans employer in the U.S. What are the systems and circumstances that is driving that fact to be true, and what are the interventions that we can make into those systems, right? Into those circumstances that are creating, helping co-create that. So that's one piece. A second is like, what are the for those queer and trans folks who have thought about joining the military in the past, right? Like, what were the reasons why you decided not to do it, and what are the things that we could kind of do to continue to bring up some of those reasons, and think about the concrete ways that we can continue to like resist war and militarism as a trans community. And also, I think like your question around like how do we talk about this with people, right? In queer and trans spaces where it already seems like we're so vulnerable, and really like what is some of the language that we can help develop together in this room? And then finally, like, what are the places that aren't having this conversation right now that should be, right? And thinking about like, what are the ways that we can start to pressure, you know, these organizations, you know, that are pushing militarism, right? That the fight has to be around inclusion into a violent colonialist system, right? Rather than the multitude of other ways that queer and trans folks are not helped in our society. So yeah, so I think that with that, we're gonna also kind of get up on the stage and join y'all. I think probably we'll take about like maybe like 15, 20 minutes for this, but if folks want to kind of just get with like you know, 5 or 6 people kind of close to you. You know, it doesn't have to be like super complicated. Yeah, and just have a discussion. And then if one person in that group wants to kind of like take notes, we're gonna do like a quick kind of report back and share at the end. Does that sound good with everybody? Awesome, thanks.
I saw. So you came down with